Everyone, my name is Blake, and the group members for 13 include Catherine, Callie, and Mark. We focused our policy on California Assembly Bill 2571, Firearms Advertising to Minors for the 2022 fiscal year. So what is gun control? According to Perez Peña, gun control is the regulations on selling, buying, and storing firearms. As such, people with criminal records, mental illnesses, substance abuse disorders, and restraining orders are prohibited from owning firearms, which include rifles, pistols, etc. There are differences in gun control laws for each state, but background checks are a federal requirement. Democrats tend to favor stricter gun control policies, while Republicans prefer less restrictions, using the Second Amendment as a basis for their arguments, which causes issues forming bipartisan legislation on this matter. So what's the big issue? Well, annually, the gun industry makes approximately $9 billion in profits, and this graph depicts some of the profits seen by the industry increased drastically over the pandemic. Taking a look at some more numbers, annually, more than 117,000 people are shot in America, and about 50,000 suffer fatal injuries from gunshot wounds. Just under 8,000 children are shot annually in America, and about 2,000 of these children die from these gunshot wounds. This graph shows the shooter to victim ratio among different age groups, and notably, high schoolers and children under the years of 5 account for the highest share of these groups. The core component of gun control is rooted in concerns for mental health. Specifically considering the effects on gun violence for children and teens in America, we see that the psychological and mental well-being is negatively affected, including their school performance when exposed to gun violence. About 33% of this age group experiences suicide by means of firearm, which equates to approximately 1,300 minors per year, with firearms typically found in the household. Gun violence in schools have also created additional anxieties for minors across the country, as fear is now instilled, on top of their academic load and extracurriculars. Even witnesses to gun violence, the negative health effects mentally can be devastating, causing a wide range of mental health issues as a result, such as depression or PTSD. More consequences. The lack of firearm control may result in continued high rates of firearm-related deaths in children under 5 and high schoolers from school shootings, homicides, suicides, and accidents, which increases one's fear of going to school. High rates of anxiety, depression, and PTSD in younger generations as a result of experiencing gun violence, which equates to a lower quality of life. And the cost of firearm-related injuries equates to about $2.7 billion throughout the 9 years, which may increase if not controlled. So our solution to this is CA Assembly Bill 2571 of 2022 from the 2021-2022 regular session. This policy was introduced at the state level and will be adding an additional chapter, which is 39, onto the existing Division 8 of Business and Profession Code as it relates to firearms. It was signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom effective July 1st of 2022. Regarding the implementation of this policy, we have 3 key focuses: advertisement, which restricts firearm industry from marketing or advertising any firearm-related product in any manner that appeals to minors, including cartoons, toys, merchandise, and even certain colors for marketing techniques. Then we have prohibition, which prohibits the firearm industry from collecting, distributing, selling, or otherwise sharing any personal data to any minor who may potentially receive such marketing information. Finally, as punishment, violations of this chapter include civil penalties not exceeding $25,000, depending on the severity of the crime, repetition of such, length of time with which it occurred, willfulness, and more.
The policy landscape for AB 2571 will start off with Policy 1. With a focus on keeping children safe and preventing the number of gun-related accidents involving children, California Governor Gavin Newsom passed Bill AB 452, called People Safety Parental Notification Firearm Safety Laws in 2022, which requires schools to educate parents about optimal firearm storage laws in their homes, addressing children's accidental misuse and fire of guns with their parents' weapon. This policy received immense support, especially from Brady, California, a prominent gun control organization that advocates for increased education and awareness of gun regulations. For policy number 2, because poor mental health often contributes to gun violence, especially in minors, some policies are directed toward this specific aspect, like HR 1109, Mental Health Services for Students Act of 2020. Receiving unanimous support in the House in 2020, this policy aims to extend mental health projects in schools and provide children better access to more comprehensive mental health services. Though not directly related to our chosen policy, this particular mental health policy touches upon one of the main attributes contributing to gun violence, but other avenues must still be considered when addressing gun violence due to minors. And then finally, for our third policy, another federal policy that helps prevent gun-related violence involving minors is HR 7910, Protecting Our Kids Act, passed in 2022. This policy aims to increase the minimum age required to purchase certain firearms, preventing gun trafficking and encouraging the safe storage of firearms. This policy received significant support, especially from pro-gun control groups in Uvalde, Texas, following the shooting on May 24th, 2022. And then for our logic model, I'll start off with input 1. So We have staff to specify criteria and guidelines of what advertisements need to look like, which was stated in a previous slide. And next, a digital system with access to contact information of every firearm dealer in California. And that leads to activity one, where every firearm dealer will be contacted regarding information on the new policy through the new digital system. And then the output is that firearm dealers are now informed and aware of the policy, ensuring that their advertisements are not directed towards minors. For our input number 2, we have purchasing software and devices for the creation of a database, and we would also need some staff to update and manage the database. Activity number 2 is create the database, and staff will perform periodic investigations on firearm dealers pertaining to the content of their advertisements and will record their findings in the database. And then our output number 2 is that database is filled out with data of firearm dealers and the respective cooperation with the regulation, where consequences are assigned to non-complying dealers. So this leads to the short-term outcome, which is that minors will have less favorable attitudes towards firearms due to the decreased attractiveness of firearm advertisements, and this can be measured through something like a survey at a school. Our intermediate outcome is that less minors will buy firearms, and then our long-term impact is that there will be a reduced disparity in firearm deaths in minority groups like the Black and Native population, which we will discuss further in a couple of slides. Additionally, there will be a decrease in rates of mental illnesses resulting from firearm violence.
Based on the logic model, we question whether AB 2571 lowered minors' favorable attitudes towards firearms in the short term due to the decreased attractiveness of firearm advertisements, whether it decreased the number of minors that purchase firearms in the intermediate time span, and specifically whether it decreased mortality rates from firearm-related incidents in the long run. The evaluation design is based on the long-term impact, specifically investigating whether the policy decreases mortality rates from firearm-related incidents. AB 2571 is a state law, so there would be no randomization of policy exposure involved, as all firearm manufacturers and dealers in California are subject to obey the law. Although another state could be used as a comparison group, California has the largest population size of all the states, so may have more firearm-related deaths just because there are more people. Texas ranks second for population, but because it is more conservative, minors may have more positive attitudes towards firearms overall, which may result in more minors owning firearms and subsequently increase firearm-related mortality rates. These differences may skew the data, making the policy seem more or less effective than it actually was, so no comparison group will be used. Additionally, firearm-related mortality rates may have decreased during COVID because of stay-at-home orders and shutdowns of workplaces, schools, and other public areas that may be more subject to shootings. Thus, having multiple historical data points throughout multiple years would balance out the confounding variables like COVID that occurred before and after the implementation of the policy to give a more accurate representation of the policy's effectiveness compared to merely having one pre-test and post-test. Lastly, there is already public data available regarding the amount of people that have died from firearm-related incidents in California since 2014. Since there is no random assignment involved, no comparison group, and since multiple historical data points would be collected, the time series design would be the best design option. The annual firearm-related mortality rates for mass shootings, school shootings, and accidental deaths in California will be collected from the Gun Violence Archive, a nonprofit organization that has compiled information since 2014 from over 7,500 sources, such as the police involved in addressing the shooting, the media, and the government, into one large publicly accessible database. Within the database, detailed information about each incident may be filtered by state, so that the amount of people that died from each incident between 2014 to 2030, 8 years before and 8 years after the implementation of the policy, can be totaled and compared to see whether firearm-related mortality rates did decrease after its implementation in 2022.
Evaluation challenges. Starting off with causality determination, due to the extended period of time of the study, other policies or initiatives could have been implemented that can have an influence on the rate of violence. As such, there's a high probability of confounding variables affecting the study. Thus, establishing the direct link between the policy and decreased gun-related mortality rates among minors is thus extremely complex, and this study may not accurately reflect this. Many factors influence mortality rate and could require careful analysis and consideration of potential confounding variables. Next, we have generalizability. Evaluating the long-term impact in one jurisdiction may not provide insight in other regions, since this is a state study. For instance, the prevalence of gun violence in California may differ greatly from southern states such as Alabama. Furthermore, cultural differences, variation in gun ownership, and differences in policy context can affect the transferability of findings. The effects of the study depend on the enforcement and compliance rates of relevant stakeholders. This study measures the effects of the policy on gun violence rather than the ads themselves. As such, the degree to which the ban on gun advertisement targeting minors has been implemented and enforced can have a confounding effect on the study. For instance, 1 year stakeholders may be exceptionally strict on not showcasing any guns on television or ads, where 2 years from then, there is little regulation or enforcement on advertising guns in social media or retailers. Moving on to the policy's impact on health equity, the marginalized communities and lower socioeconomic groups are disproportionately affected by gun violence. For instance, when comparing the 2020 U.S. population census map and the CDC's map of gun violence in the nation of that same year, there was a positive correlation between the higher densities of African Americans and gun violence mortality rates. This trend is further seen in the Gun Violence Archive map of 2023 deaths due to gun violence. Some ways this policy can impact health equity is changing attitudes on firearms. Restricting gun marketing towards minors, we can reduce the normalization of guns in marginalized communities, as well as decrease appeal and curiosity minors may have with firearms. Furthermore, this policy can promote alternative policy strategies. Banning gun marketing rather than increasing punishment for possession or criminal activity can shift policy focus towards alternative strategies for conflict resolution and personal safety. For instance, education, community programs, and mental health support. As such, efforts are directed towards underlying social determinants of health and promoting nonviolent approaches, thus resulting in longer-term health equity benefits through tackling root causes of violence and fostering healthier communities. Lastly, it can decrease unintentional injuries. Restricting markets can reduce exposure and minimize influence, thus leading to better health outcomes via preventing avoidable harm from firearms. And then our thought-provoking question to you guys are there alternative approaches to gun marketing regulations that could be more effective in preventing firearm-related incidents among minors? And then these are our references. Okay. Thank you guys for listening.